Welcome to the Carousel of Happiness Podcast. I'm your host, Allie Wagner. On our last episode, we heard the story of Rebecca Lynn and her path to community-based acupuncture, which she offers for free at the Carousel twice a week. On that episode, we explored the simultaneous complexity and simplicity of the human body, as well as our connection to each other. In honor of Valentine's Day this week, today's episode is all about love and the heart. But before you shut the podcast off here, I promise we're going to talk about a different kind of love. A love that isn't made of paper hearts, but one that's being circulated throughout the Carousel community through a new addition to the Carousel's roof. On today's episode, we'll talk about the electromagnetic field of the Carousel, the anatomy of the human heart, and the power of living a heart-centered life. Let us begin with today's story. If you've driven by the Carousel recently, you've likely noticed a new addition to the roof. Perched on the peak of the roof above the second floor balcony, you'll see a metal pipe with a blue cylinder on top. It's about a foot tall with a little cone top, and attached to the sides are 4 plastic funnels. And as the wind blows in Netherlands, and boy does it blow here, air comes into the funnels, spins the conical cylinder around. And as it goes round and round, just like the carousel, you can read the words on the side that surround it. They read peace, love, and joy. This recent addition to the Carousel is called the Loverator. It is a whirligig that was made by local resident, carpenter, and self-described spiritual guy, Guy Pfeiffer. Guy is soft-spoken and thoughtful. I met him for the first time last week when he came in with Scott to install the Loverator at the Carousel. At first glance, Guy looks like the kind of guy who knows where everything is in a hardware store. When he told me later he was a carpenter, I was not surprised. It would make sense that he knows his way around a hardware store. But once I got to talk to him, I realized he's not only the guy who knows where everything is at the hardware store, he's the kind of guy who knows not only what aisle something's on, but what spot on the shelf. Guy is the kind of guy who knows that the 2-inch paint brushes got moved last week because Helen was out sick. Guy is the kind of guy who pays attention. He is present in this life in a way that allows him to notice details others might miss. As he describes it, he's the kind of guy who builds things you've never seen before. He just gets the idea to make something like the Loverator, and he runs to the hardware store to make it happen. Guy made his first Loverator for his backyard. It sits on his deck and it spins around, round and round, spreading the energy of love, peace, and joy with every turn. And Guy loves his Loverator. According to him, love is the, quote, source of all life and all being. And when he sees the whirligig spin round and round, the words love, peace, and joy spin, and he can feel the energy with it spreading all around. Guy loves to sit in his backyard and focus his attention on all of that love that's being pumped out of the Loverator, courtesy of the wind. Guy was very excited to show his Loverator to Scott. They're friends. They're part of a group of local, quote-unquote, old guys, their words, not mine, who meet at a local restaurant in town every Monday morning for breakfast. This elder man's breakfast, as Guy calls it, has been going on for at least a decade, probably closer to 2 at this point. Guy started coming to the elder man's breakfast about 2 years ago. He heard about it from Dave Current, who works at, you guessed it, the hardware store. And as Guy describes it, a handful of old guys gather together and check in on one another. They support each other. They meet once a week, and as Guy explains it to me, they share their love for one another. And according to him, sharing love is heaven. Because Guy is the kind of guy who says that kind of stuff to me, a person he just met. I spoke to Guy on the phone this week for about 20 minutes. And in that 20 minutes, we talked about love and the Loverator and how we're spiritual beings having a physical experience. How the energy of love must flow to be re-energized. According to Guy, love must be circulated within us and between us to stay fresh, to stay vital. And the Loverator helps this happen. He believes that the more love we share, the more we get in return. And so when he offered to make Scott a Loverator for the carousel, Scott immediately said yes. And this isn't unusual for the carousel. Scott has collaborated with local artists, poets, and writers to bring their work and their gifts under the carousel umbrella. In the gift shop, you'll find books of poetry inspired by the carousel, short stories inspired by the carousel, not to mention the stained glass in the ceiling, the fresco on the walls, or these words on this podcast. Scott is always bringing like-minded artists and collaborators into the fold. And in thinking about love and the Loverator and the carousel's role in spreading that love, I was reminded of a term I learned recently, called gnosis cardiaca. It's a term I first became aware of when reading the book Evolutionary Herbalism by Seja Popham. In it, he explains that gnosis cardiaca references the acquisition of wisdom through nature through the direct perception of the heart. He goes on to explain how the nervous system has 3 distinct groupings of neural tissues located in the gut, the heart, and the brain. And these distinct yet connected neural networks are our primary seats of consciousness or awareness. It's in these locations where our bodies perceive the world around us. And each of these areas perceives the world differently through its own unique lens. When we think about the gut, we're talking about our instinctual self, the part of ourselves that is focused on protection and self-preservation. This is the part of us that scans for dangers in our environment and signals to the body when basic needs like nourishment and hydration need to be met. Early on in human evolution, this was where our primary focus was. It was on keeping ourselves alive and safe. And slowly, as these basic needs were met, our attention and our awareness moved up the gut toward the heart, allowing us to experience our values, emotional truths, relationships, and connections, as well as the meaning of life. Then, as human evolution progresses, we began to direct our attention to the mind. This is when we saw the advent of science, as well as the industrial and technological revolutions. With our minds, we're able to separate things, categorize them, label them, analyze them. With the mind, we pick things apart to understand the whole. And as a society, as a culture, we've come to lean very heavily on the intellectual brain, the mind. And as a result, we have lost touch with the heart. And what's interesting is that we're starting to learn more about the heart and its role in our bodies. We now know that the heart is hardwired to the brain with direct neural connections to the medulla, the amygdala, the cerebral cortex, and the frontal lobes. These areas of the brain are responsible not only for basic physiological functions like breathing and regulating heart rate, but also related to emotional memory, the translation of sensory data into meaning, problem solving, spatial orientation, and higher reasoning. Our hearts, in short, help control our mind's perception of the world around us through this connection. And the heart is connected to every single cell of the body through the pumping of blood. It has an electromagnetic field 5,000 times larger than that of the brain. That means its electromagnetic field permeates every single cell of our body and extends up to 10 feet beyond our physical bodies. There's this cool thing that heart cells can do. They can be synchronized with one another. So if you separate a single heart cell from the heart, it will fibrillate or contract randomly on its own for a while, but it will eventually die out. But if you take that same heart cell and put it close enough to the heart itself, the electromagnetic field of the heart will bring that single heart cell back into its rhythm. They will synchronize or entrain with each other. When we direct our awareness away from the brain and down into the heart, our entire body becomes synchronized with itself. When our perception or awareness is primarily in our heads, our body's systems are left to their own devices, much like that isolated heart cell, and as a result, we can experience internal imbalances and become out of tune with ourselves. Our hearts are also a way to connect with the electromagnetic fields of the outside world. Remember, our heart's electromagnetic field extends 10 feet outside our physical bodies, allowing us to connect to people, plants, animals, and yes, carousels. I wonder how strong the electromagnetic field of the carousel is, because it feels like it has its own rhythm, its own beat. And it feels like if you get close enough to it, your system starts to entrain and sync up with it. You become part of a larger web, a piece of the collective tapestry. And my conversation with Guy is a reminder of this. He and I were able to have such an incredibly deep and meaningful conversation with one another in 20 minutes because through our connection with a carousel, somehow we're already to a certain extent on the same wavelength, part of the same frequency somehow. And that is true for my colleagues, and it is true for anyone who finds themselves walking through the door. It is my hope that this podcast, much like the Loverator, will circulate the energy and love of the carousel to anybody who is listening with an open heart. And that is something to celebrate this Valentine's Day. Speaking of spreading the love, big shout out to Kelly from Evergreen, Colorado, who visited the carousel this week because of the podcast. Thank you, thank you, thank you. If you are inspired to spend a little bit more time in your heart this week, Saja Popham recommends 4 practices to get you out of your head and into your heart. The first one is easy. Focus your attention down into your heart. This can be during meditation or prayer or right before bed, focusing on your heartbeat, feeling your chest moving up and down. In this state of contemplation, you should eventually feel simultaneously relaxed and focused. You can rest there for a minute, observing your heart, paying attention to your heart, drawing your awareness down into your heart. Repeat as desired. But if it's tricky at first, don't worry. It takes a little bit of practice. Most of us, myself included, have spent a lot of our lives in our heads, and it takes an adjustment to direct that attention down. The second way to activate the heart is through our senses. Whenever we are aware of our sensory perception, we lose track of our thoughts. You can try to do this at the carousel, of course, or anywhere that your senses are heightened. In the bath, on a walk, at the beach. You can focus your attention on what you see, smell, touch, and taste, and watch your thoughts melt away. The third practice to access the heart space is through relaxation. You know you're operating from the heart when your parasympathetic nervous system is activated. This rest and digest nervous system, as they call it, is different than fight or flight. If you can bring a little bit more relaxation to your day, you'll move yourself slowly toward your heart. And lastly, you can connect with your breath. On a physiological level, the respiratory system is the shortest pathway to the heart. The breath is a bridge not only to the heart, but between the mind and body as well. Breathing is governed by the autonomic nervous system, so that part of the nervous system that's beyond our conscious control. And it's also governed by the somatic nervous system, which is the one that we can control. And so we can leverage the breath, either being mindful of it, counting it, repeating a mantra with it. We can use the breath to consciously control our minds, hearts, and bodies. If you try any of these practices, let me know how it goes. How does it feel to be more connected to your heart? If you come into the carousel this week, what do you notice about your heart while you're here? How do you feel? And if you're feeling the effects of the Loverator, go ahead and send Guy a little bit of love. In the meantime, take care. Be well. And as we like to say at the Carousel of Happiness, don't delay joy. And we'll see you next time around.
Beginnings and endings are only pretendings. I'll see you next time around. I'll see